And good morning. Welcome to everyone. I'm so glad you could come. Multi-generational event here. Delighted to see. And I'm really eager to have a chance to talk with Russell. He and I have been trying to connect pretty much since I came to Mount Desert Island. And he's busy, and the college has been keeping me busy. So this is a chance for us to have a chance to kind of probe what each other is working on, what we're interested in, and where we're going, respectively, and how these two things that we're doing, MOFGA, which Russell is running and which I hope he'll tell you a bit about, and the new Sustainable Food Systems program here at COA, I'm really interested in how these two things can support each other and support local and regional farming in Maine. So, Russell, do you want to talk a little bit about MOFGA and what you're doing?
Well, and the connection goes way back. So I grew up over there, next door to Peggy Sharp, actually, on the other side of the bay in Sorrento. MOFGA is Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, and if you didn't get it, there's a guide to farms out on the table and a little seasonal food guide that we're putting together and put out every couple months. I think the MOFGA COA connections go back to the early 70s when Elliot Coleman was teaching a class here at the college, which was kind of the spark for the community garden, the college gardens. That orchard got planted then, and Zach and I were talking a little earlier. I have all these audio tapes that kicked around in the back of my car for a long time and are probably in atrocious shape. But some of them were Elliot's lectures on sustainable agriculture from like 1976 here at the campus. The other really strong historic connections are Shelley Pingree, who's now Congresswoman, started MOFGA's apprenticeship program about when she worked for MOFGA, but then she came and kind of coordinated that from COA in the late 1970s. And then Beach Hill Farm. So Beach Hill Farm was a certified organic farm owned by Barbarina Heyerdahl, and she had a series of really good farmers who came in and farmed Beach Hill Farm, and then she donated it to the college, and there's been another series of very good farmers who kept Beach Hill Farm going. So those are kind of some of the historic connections. A lot of COA students who've gone on to apprentice on different MOFGA farms through the years and worked on farms. And one of the big things that we've done through the years is train really a big chunk of the next generation of farmers in Maine. So the apprenticeship program, about 150 people every summer go work on a farm and kind of get their feet, not their feet dirty, they get their hands dirty, sometimes feet too. And some of them go on to farm, and then we do a new farmer training program. So MOFGA, when it started, had 15 people who said they were organic farmers. And this year we're certifying 400 farms around Maine. So about 5% of the farms in Maine are certified organic, and there are hundreds more who are using organic practices and choose not to certify. Either they're exempt or they're stubborn or some combination. So that's a little bit of what we're doing. We're basically trying to create a local food system out of what had almost totally disappeared. And I saw Howdy here, and a food system isn't just farms, it's also fisheries and how do these pieces connect, and how do we maintain some capacity to feed ourselves.
And to me, what MOFGA is doing is really glorious. At a time that farms have been disappearing in this country for decades, very rapidly. Farm size has been consolidating, farm land has gone out of production, gone into development. The average age of farmers, I think, is 59 now, isn't it?
In the country, yes.
In the country. But Maine is one of the few states, the New England generally, in the last agricultural census, which was done in 2008, but the data takes a while to process, so you don't get the numbers until a year or two after. This is one of the very few areas where the number of farms has actually increased. And that, to me, is hugely significant because I really think We need more farmers in this country. We need more farmers right now to be producing healthy food, and we will need even more farmers as we go into what I like to call a post-petroleum economy. As the oil runs out, as it becomes increasingly expensive to extract oil, I think what we've seen down in the Gulf is a great example of the death throes of the petroleum industry, that we simply cannot continue to rely on petroleum. But right now, our food system is completely reliant on it. So Mount Desert Island, we're relying on food that's being shipped in here. There's very little local agriculture. I'd love to see more of it on the island, and would love your thoughts, Russell, about how to do that.
I have a continuing fight with Stu Smith, who's a professor at the University of Maine, about the impact of energy on the food system. And Stu rightly points out that the energy part of getting food from California to Maine is nominal. So all of those 50,000-pound tractor trailers that are moving from California east, just a steady train of them, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. When the price of diesel went from $3 a gallon to almost $6 a gallon, that added about 3 cents a pound to moving stuff across the country. And so in terms of the dollar impact at the market, it's really not that. It's really a question of what kind of communities people want. So we could, our food system right now is anything from anywhere, anytime. We can get food from anywhere in the world, anytime we want it. I was with a produce buyer for one of the large supermarkets one day, because I could pick up the phone right now and call Guatemala and ask them to pick me 100,000 pounds of beans, and they'll have it on a plane tonight, and tomorrow morning it'll be in our warehouse, and it'll be on the store in the afternoon.
One of those large produce buyers, define local food to me, it's anything he can get within 24 hours.
Yeah.
It's basically anything in the world.
Essentially, yeah. So that's the model that we're operating under, and the question is whether that's the model we want. So I was the petroleum economist for the state of Maine 25 years ago, or actually a little longer now, and I believed that we're using more oil than we should, and that we probably don't have as much left as we think we do for a long time. But I think the way we're going to change that is to change. We're not going to change the petroleum industry, we're going to change how we do things, and as we change how we do things, the petroleum industry becomes less relevant. I think that's probably the real cycle that we have to go through, and that, so MOFGA has really been focused on how do we build institutions that support one another. So Maine right now is actually a surplus calorie state. That is, we produce more calories in the state of Maine than we consume. They're in the form of potatoes, or more accurately in the form of French fries, and in the form of lobster. So yeah, we're a calorie surplus state, but most people are not going to eat a lobster and French fries 365 diet. So if we talk about what we really eat, we're about 20%. So we produce about 20% of the calories that we consume, and it's in the form of dairy. We're kind of a dairy balanced state, so our milk, the milk we consume comes from here, and the milk we consume in the form of cheese is offset by the milk we ship out of state. So we're kind of balanced on dairy. We supply our potatoes, obviously, which is too much of our diet, but not all that much in terms of percent. And then almost everything else that we eat comes from somewhere else. So we're calorie surplus, but we're not feeding ourselves. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Norway, Sweden, Denmark. Post-World War II, Norway and Sweden in particular set up a common agricultural policy for their countries that was based on maintaining the capacity to feed themselves. Didn't matter if they were exporting it or importing it, they just wanted that capacity. Because during World War II, they were embargoed or they were surrounded, and they basically realized that they could survive with 80% of the calories that were kind of normal in the diet. So their policy is 80% of the capacity. And I think that's a really good model for us all to be thinking about. Great. The economy, somebody in some other parts of the world wants to buy lobster and we ship it, or frozen wild blueberries and we ship it. But if we have that capacity, then we can, in an emergency, we have something to work with. We can, and we can also look at it as an economic development strategy. And right now, Maine spends $5 billion a year on groceries, and almost all that money goes somewhere else. It takes a lot of low-wage tourism jobs to pay $5 billion worth of grocery bills. And if people spent $10 a week on local food, it would keep $100 million of that here. So just really simple, what are the first steps? Because we don't have the capacity, as Molly was saying, to do the entire. Maine has the land base, but it doesn't have the farm base. The land's not all in good shape right now. It's not in production. All the New England-wide studies that I'm looking at, who's going to grow New England's food in the future, they all look at Maine because we're the only place that has available farmland, but only a third of the land that we would need to be a significant supplier in New England is in production right now.
That whole attitude toward self-sufficiency is very different in the United States from Europe. I worked on a multi-year project that was funded by several of the United Nations agencies and the World Bank it's called for short the ISTAT. It's the International Assessment of Agricultural Knowledge, Science, and Technology for Development. And it was basically looking at the last 50 years of agricultural investment that the United States, not just the United States, but that has happened worldwide. And trying to figure, of all the money that's been invested, what have been the real impacts on hunger, on rural livelihoods, on environmental sustainability, and gender equity, on socially, environmentally, and economically sustainable development as we look at that balance now. And some of the results that we came up with were very predictable, and they're mirrored by this study that just came out from the National Research Council in the United States of 21st Century Agriculture, a project that the Kellogg Foundation partially funded, USDA funded it too, that we have invested far too much in productivity, of increasing the productivity and yields of a few crops like corn, wheat, rice, cotton, and far too little in environmental stewardship. So we've gotten these amazing increases in productivity, but at the expense of the environment. Going back to Russell's point that a lot of the land that's in Maine needs help, and I can see that even out on the farm that we've just been given by the Rockefeller family as a very generous gift. It needs nutrient inputs. The land has been hay for years, which means nutrients have been removed from the land, but nutrients haven't been supplied, which could be done through grazing, through integrated cropping and livestock. But the reason I started talking about the ISTAT was that my group, I was one of the coordinating lead authors of the North America-Europe report that was looking at these questions as they applied to North America and not just Western Europe, but Eastern and Central Europe too, which are very, very different. It was extremely interesting to me to get a better understanding of what's been happening agriculturally in these areas that were under Soviet domination for so long. But in Europe, after World War II, there was really a sense of vulnerability that they needed, every European country needed to ensure its own food supply. A study just came out from England not very long ago, within the last 2 years, called Sustainable Food Security. And what it's focused on is how England can become about 80% food self-sufficient, how it can increase the number of farmers, increase the amount of farmland that's being produced, so that it is truly food secure, regardless of what happens. If there are weather disasters, which we will see increasingly with global climate change, if there are breakdowns in the fuel supply, which not only affect transportation of trucks, and a lot of our food is also flown in, which takes a lot more fuel, but every stage of food production now is reliant on petroleum. Nitrogen fertilizer is incredibly petroleum intensive to produce the way that we're producing it now. The packaging that's on just about every food product that you buy at the supermarket, that's made with petroleum products. So it requires a dramatic reshuffling of how we produce, how we consume, how we package and distribute food, if we really want to move away from that dependence on petroleum. But I think in the United States, we've lost that picture of the need to be self-sufficient. Our reserves in this country are incredibly low. We saw that with Hurricane Katrina, when the hurricane blocked the barges that were coming down the Mississippi and blocked the passage of food for a while. New Orleans was in trouble food-wise because we do not have sufficient reserves to last us more than a matter of days to weeks, depending on the particular food that you have in mind. So if there's a disaster, we really are in trouble. Having more farms, more farmers, helps to protect us. It's a matter of security, really, for us.
But it's not really part of the national conversation about what
No.
security is.
Competitiveness and pushing toward more exports is the national picture. And that's the picture under Obama, too. International agricultural policy has changed very, very little under the Obama administration. It's been a huge disappointment to many of us who've been tracking agricultural policy. We've seen a few glimmers of hope, some positive signs with domestic policy. There's been a little more support, primarily due to Kathleen Merrigan, who was a woman I knew from my days at Tufts. I started a program in agriculture, food, and environment at Tufts University, and Kathleen Merrigan was my successor as the director of that program. And then she was tapped by USDA. She had worked for Senator Leahy previously before she came to Tufts. She was tapped to be the deputy administrator of the Department of Agriculture in Washington, and has really done a superb job there, including starting up a program called Know Your Farmer, Know Your Food, which is increasing some of the financial incentives, increasing a little bit of the money that's going into building up local and regional food systems, exactly the thing that MOFGA has been so strong in. But at the same time, we are continuing to dismantle local and regional food systems internationally through our policies of trying to export so much of what we produce here and trying to export the farming systems that have proven not to be particularly successful or sustainable in the long run in the United States. Biotech is one of the big elements, I think, because of a lot of pressure from agribusiness to have this included in our international agricultural policy. You will see biotechnology as one of the prominent features of any agricultural bill that the United States is pushing right now, ostensibly to feed hungry people. But that's not really a successful solution if what you're looking at is addressing hunger and improving rural livelihoods. You need simple technologies. You need technologies that can be implemented with the resources that are there, technologies that will help to restore degraded land, a huge problem in most developing countries right now, where erosion has been rampant.
For one thing, there is this major international tension. I heard a professor from the University of Minnesota give a talk this winter, and he looked at okay, the current mantra is, how are we going to feed 10 billion people? First, there's a presumption that feeding 10 billion people is a good thing, but
And our responsibility.
and our collective, the U.S.'s responsibility. And his take on it, he did a very great, GIS-based analysis of the entire world. He's had students working on it for years, and shows lots of pictures. And at the back of it all is, we either intensify agriculture on the best ground, or we cut down the rainforest. That's one alternative that he posits. Of course, it's not actually what you would call a good set of choices. And the second was, we need to change our marketing system so that we don't have these inefficient marketing systems where people actually talk to each other. We need Cargill in Eastern Europe, was his basic message. We need Cargill in the Ukraine. We need Cargill in Poland. We need Cargill, the Cargill model of one or two companies controlling most of the grain in the world, gathering it all up so that we can get it wherever it needs to be efficiently. And that's the one mindset. And the alternative is not a very well organized alternative, or at least in the United States it's not. And yet internationally, there's a citizens movement via Campesina that has something like 100 million, peasant farmers around the world are part of this movement, and it's invisible in these conversations. So they are the real on-the-ground alternative to the consolidated, integrated international food system. Right now, that system, the consolidated system is the one that's winning.
And it goes back to your point, Russell. What kind of community do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a community where Cargill is making the choices about the kind of food that we get, the kind of food products we get? Or do we want to live in a community where there are diversified farms that are producing healthy food for us, and farmers who are making a decent living from raising food? They aren't making a decent living under the Cargill model, because Cargill is shoving their costs down the system, and they are very interested in paying as little as possible for the products that they buy, wherever in the world they can buy them, and selling them for as much as possible in the countries where they can sell. So this isn't helping world hunger either.
Well, and I think the model that we all have in our head is the one that we grew up with, or learned about, and so I think of it as Old MacDonald's farm. Everybody has this picture of the integrated farm, diversified farm, and a few of this and a few of that. And I was at a dairy farm the other day where they have, and by national standards, it's a very small dairy farm. By Maine standards, it's a big one. They have like 4,000 cows, and they can milk 2,000 cows in 3 hours, and very sophisticated technologically. And so, what is it that we want? Do we want to buy from people, or do we want to buy from institutions, and how does that work? And I think this is intended to be kind of a conversation. So we've been talking, but if people have questions or want to follow up on anything, please just wave your hand and we'll try to.
So Russell,
Yeah.
It seems like to some extent when you talk about agricultural policy, one of the questions then is what it means to be a successful agricultural policy. So what the metric is that you use. And so I could use one that says most production of tons of whatever wheat. Or I could say cheapest food per pound of wheat or something like that in terms of a consumer-based one. But those metrics don't get to a lot of the things you guys are talking about, which are sustainable communities or the socioeconomic things, security, whatever those issues. So and if I'm a manager, it's a lot easier to manage two big corporations. I do fisheries work, and so the small versus large is perfectly analogous. But as a manager, it's a lot easier for me to manage two gigantic corporations than to try to deal with 5,000 little guys in terms of management. So how do you come up with a metric of success? How do you develop that, and how does that compare with what you think the current ones are?
There are some really good first level models for how you measure success. And often they are, often your goals are in conflict. So you're trying to balance, and some of them have been models where you have a circle and you have like 5 or 8 points on that outer circle that you're trying to work towards, and you keep self-assessing how far out towards the outer bounds of the circle you're getting. I think those, if we could start talking in those kinds of complex terms, it changes the dynamics. So the simpler the metric, the easier it is to just say, hey, we're meeting that metric. The more complex the metric, the more complex the measurements or the goals, it's hard. And it's hard for farmers to measure, how am I doing on environmental stewardship versus how am I doing on economic viability. Those are tensions that we're all grappling with. Nobody's making money right now at the producer level in any significant way. The very big farms are able to stay in business. The very small farms capitalize by off-farm income. And I know there's some really good conversations, Howdy's been part of it, Eat Local Foods Coalition, that MOFGA is part of it, about how you integrate fisheries and farms. But I think we need to be talking about how we get those measurements out there so that people can make choices when they buy food. So if you don't know anything about the systems, how can you make an informed choice? You make the choice based on price.
Some of it has to do with the choices people make when they buy food. And that's very real. You can have an influence by what you are supporting. And I know MOFGA's done some work on the changes that you can make in Maine agriculture if you just spent $10 a week on local food. But a lot of it goes beyond that, and we have to be looking at national policy changes that start paying farmers for providing ecosystem services. I don't know if that concept is familiar to everyone, but the things that good farmland and good stewardship can provide, like pure water, clean water, or wildlife habitat, or carbon sequestration, actually keeping carbon in the soil instead of being emitted into the atmosphere where it contributes to global warming. We can be paying farmers for that instead of just paying them to be producing more and more and more corn when we have these incredible surpluses of corn and we end up dumping it in countries and undermining the costs of producing that corn locally, which drives farmers out of business. Yeah.
That's most of what we're doing with our extra corn, is burning it as ethanol. So.
Which is crazy, just crazy. Corn is a ridiculous crop to be trying to make biofuel from. There are other crops that have potential there. The technology isn't very far along, but corn, where we're already putting so many inputs on that corn, and there's so much land that's devoted to monoculture corn, the seed stock that we're using for the corn is just pumping up the pockets of Monsanto. It's not helping any local businesses. That's the wrong way to be pushing. But our federal policy overall is supporting agribusinesses and the very largest farmers who have been in business for the longest time, raising vast acreages of these very few commodity crops. Not the kinds of farms that you're seeing in Maine.
So there was a question somewhere right here.
I was wondering, are there any examples of, in large farm, industrial farms, are they all bad? I mean, I wonder, we go to Prince Edward Island a lot. There used to be lots of local farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Now McCann and one other big outfit have taken over everything.
McCain's and Cavendish.
Cavendish. So it doesn't seem to be very healthy socially. I don't know about the production of food and distribution of food, how that works out. But I think the economy of size, maybe this is not a good example, but I think of Henry Ford with a small car that everybody could afford, which you could only do if you had mass production. Now, is there anything in agriculture that suggests in a constructive, enlightened way you can go the direction of the large farm?
Yeah. Well, scale is a really important value to talk about. So in the US, we spend about 8% of our gross income on food. In Europe, people spend about 20% of their gross income on food. In Africa and South America, it may be 50 to 70% of their gross income on food. You know, we have driven down our food costs, and the only way you can supply inexpensive food in large quantities is through scale. There's also advantages to scale in terms of just your ability to not do the most onerous jobs by hand. So, you know, every farmer who can find a way to mechanize so they don't have to pull weeds finds a way to mechanize so they don't have to pull weeds. But you can do that at a 5-acre scale, or you can do that at a 50-acre scale, or you can do that at a 5,000-acre scale. And all of our incentives have gone towards doing it at a 5,000-acre scale. There are some really good, responsible, fairly large farms. So the farm I was at the other day that has milking almost 2,000 cows, that's like 4 generations on the same farm. It's all family owned, it's a family corporation, they're all working together. In many ways, there's some really great social values embedded in that model, and they've had to scale to be able to integrate all those generations of the farm at the same family at the same time. The break point for me is when it moves from the complex family structure to the, you know, almost to the stockholder shareholder type structure, because I think a lot of the incentives for continuity and for responsible management start to go away when you have the ownership structure becomes so diffuse that that people's interests are basically making sure they're making their money instead of all the other value systems. You know,
Which goes back to that diminishment of complexity. Farming is a complex operation, and when you shrink it down to just making money, then you lose a lot of that complexity.
And I don't know how many of you have read Louis Bromfield, who was a really influential writer in the 1940s. Pulitzer Prize-winning author, came back to Ohio, had movies made of his stuff in the 30s, came back to Ohio and consolidated a bunch of very small farms, so small that they weren't really viable farms, into this place called Malabar Farm. And Malabar Farm, I think, is still a classic example of finding the right scale. It was about 600 acres, so by current Ohio standards, very small. By Ohio standards of the 40s, very large. And yet Malabar Farm was able to employ people, pay them a decent wage, build soil on some very worn-out farms, and also model for many other farmers. So on Sunday afternoons, Louis Bromfield would get in his Jeep and lead a caravan that ended up being sometimes thousands of people long and do show and tells all around that farm. It was an extraordinarily model. Aldermere Farm in Rockport actually was inspired by Louis Bromfield. There's a farmer up in Atkinson who used to ride in the Jeep with Louis Bromfield, and so that's part of how I've heard the stories of what's happening there. But that scale works. So I think you have to go to the point where you can have a sense of what's going on and deal with the complexity.
There's some other farms that have been highlighted in 2 national studies that have been done of sustainable agriculture. One was published in 1989, 2 studies that were done by National Research Council. It was called Alternative Agriculture, and it included case studies of several farms that were trying to use what were termed alternative practices at that point because they were so counter to the dominant model. And then this other report that just came out about a month ago that I mentioned earlier, 21st Century Sustainable Agriculture, that revisited a lot of these farms that had been included as case studies in the 1989 book. They're still flourishing. Some of the bigger farms there, Lundberg Farm, which raises rice in California, Stephen Pavich's grape farm, which was basically growing organic grapes on very large acreages. So they were able to make it work. They were still family farms. I agree completely with Russell that it's the family farming as the break point. Although you can have ways to get economies of scale by farm cooperatives. They have not been as popular in this country, and especially not recently. But it's another way that small-scale farmers can pool, either to buy inputs at lower prices or pool their products so that they can get into markets that don't want to buy from a lot of little tiny guys. And we have several examples of farm co-ops that are pretty successful.
Are
Fedco
you giving us a
seed and-
blind one or a
No,
question?
mine was a sort of question, and it's mostly for you, Russell. I don't know if you worked with one of our students, Moody. We have a large international population at the school, and a lot of them are driven to come here by the food systems program because they want to go back to their home country and implement the same kind of organic and political systems that MOFGA has. And one was from Davis. Where's Moody from? What?
He works in Western Kenya.
So he studied for his senior project MOFGA and tried to take the structures that you've in relationships and import them to Kenya. And I'm wondering, is that, how does one go about that? How does MOFGA work?
So we're a membership organization. We have about 6,000 members, which is by national standards one of the bigger groups like ours. Actually, it's by far the biggest group like this. And we have a staff of 23, I think, and a big board, 23. And we've tried to focus on the things where we can make a difference. So the new farmer training piece, technical assistance. So we have the first organic extension agent in the country, essentially, because cooperative extension, although somewhat sympathetic, really wasn't going to just say, hey, all you do is organic. I saw Ron over there. I was being
had to get that.
extension has multiple constituents, and so we ended up hiring an organic crop specialist 25 years ago, and that was really the first person in the country who was hired by any organization to go out and just work with farmers and solve these problems. So there's a technical assistance piece, there's a marketing piece, there's a training piece, and then there's all the outreach parts. And how you build them, you have to build them incrementally. So it's just one little step at a time, and if you are careful, and then you can go to the next step, just like COA started, much smaller than it is now.
We still have a lot of interest in that. I was out at Beach Hill Farm just yesterday afternoon, and a young woman who had worked at COA previously was out there. She's teaching science now at a high school on St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And there is no food grown on St. John whatsoever. No food. There's very little soil, number one. It's steep, and the soil that was there originally has eroded or been washed away during years and years of sugarcane plantations. But she's really interested in growing food at her high school. There's an old soccer field that's available to them, and they want to put raised beds in and grow food. So she said she came back to Maine. She knows Maine. She knew Beach Hill Farm, was familiar with that. So Alicia Strader, our farm manager, was showing her the tools that she needs to buy and showing her how to do this on a small scale, how to get started growing food. And Debbie Harris, who's the business manager for the farm, has done a lot of work with youth curricula in schools. She came out of Philadelphia and worked with the Urban Nutrition Initiative that's trying to get healthier food into schools and low-income neighborhoods. And she was telling this visitor, Chris Bennett from the U.S. Virgin Islands, telling her about some of the curricula that are available to teach kids about agriculture, about gardening, about nutrition, about better health, about cooking with the products that they grow. So we have continuing interests. There's a partner college, Simon Bolivar College in Venezuela, that would really like to get some of our students who are studying sustainable agriculture down there. They have an agricultural program, but it's nothing to do with sustainability. It's pretty traditional, and they would love to have some of our students going down to Venezuela and working with their students to teach them, both their students and their faculty, how to use more sustainable practices. You have a question?
Well, just sort of commenting on this international element. I'm the president of an organization called Sustainable Harvest International, and we're based over in Surrey, but we work in Central America, and we basically have an organic extension program similar to what Russell was mentioning that MOFGA has, where we're working with about 2,500 family farms in Central America and teaching them how to switch from slash and burn and chemical intensive farming to sustainable organic farming, which has allowed them to see their income increase by as much as 9-fold, while allowing them to stop burning the rainforest and preserve the rainforests and improve their nutrition and everything else. And there's been a tremendous response in the 13 years that we've been doing this. There's huge demand with more people wanting this type of assistance. And we've been able to collaborate with COA, having an intern at our office in Surrey, having an intern in Belize. I think he had to leave, but Louise was here earlier. And I'm hoping that today might be the start of some conversations about further collaborations where we can, well, I'm very much in favor of the 80% local idea. I'd like to see where the other 20%, whether MOFGA and COA and maybe some others, can look at an alternative model for that other 20% that could connect farmers here directly with the farmers that are working with us in Central America and other parts of the world someday too.
I'd be very interested in doing that. And part of what we're trying to do with the Sustainable Food Systems program here at College of the Atlantic is both to address our own food supply at the college and also build partnerships where our students can do meaningful internships, both to provide service in Maine. I'd love to see interns on a regular basis with MOFGA because I think you have so much to teach our students, but also regular internships in developing countries where our students can go learn from people there and also be providing some service while they're in that country.
And we could,
Just in this country, oh, I'm sorry, just in this country, do you have organized lobbying efforts? And if so, in Congress, I'm thinking of at state level. And if so, what are the pressure points that you consider to be the first ones that ought to be applied? What's the strategy?
Boy, great question. I can tell you the thing that is really hot right now is reauthorization of child nutrition. Congress, the House of Representatives, is due to go on break this Friday, I think, and then the Senate goes on break on August 6th. And it is absolutely essential that they pass child nutrition reauthorization, which deals with a lot of really important programs that ensure that low-income kids have enough food and healthy food. The child nutrition reauthorization this time around has several changes in it that will increase the quality of food that kids are getting, including in the Senate version, $25 million in mandatory funding over 5 years for farm-to-school programs, which will allow school districts to buy food from local farmers. Shelley Pingree, who you mentioned earlier, who's one of our graduates, is pushing a similar bill in Maine. This can be done at the state level as well as the national level, and states can augment what's possible at the national level. She's pushing to have half of the money that goes into, or 10% of the money that goes into school districts to purchase from what's called the Commodity Supplemental Foods Program. It's basically money that the government buys from farmers and then makes available to school districts at very low prices for things like the National School Lunch Program. She's pushing to have 10% of that allocated into local purchasing. And that could create such a huge demand. It doesn't sound like much, probably, 10%, but it could create such a huge demand that would make a really big difference for local farmers and make it possible for the young farmers who MOFGA is supporting to have more reliable markets. So I'd say child nutrition reauthorization is critical. Some of the big lobbyists who are working for more sustainable causes in Washington, the Sustainable Agriculture Coalition is one of the groups in Washington. They have a great website, and you can go and look at any point to see what's hot. You can get on their action alert list. Also, the Community Food Security Coalition, which I work with, which is pushing more for healthy food for low-income people. They have action alerts. You can get on their website. That's www.foodsecurity.org and www.sustainableagriculture.net. Actually, .net is the National Family Farm Coalition.
No, that's National Sustainable Ag.
Is it? Okay, okay. But both of those are strong, good national lobbyists for progressive causes. And child nutrition reauthorization is the hot issue. So if you can call both representatives and senators and say, vote for this and make sure that you vote for it, that it passes both the House and the Senate before September 30th, which is the day that the existing Child Nutrition Act expires. If it doesn't go through before September 30th, then the after-school lunch program, the school breakfast program, WIC funding, all of these things will expire, which means a lot of people will be going hungry, especially children.
So I agree with all of that on the Child Nutrition Act. The other piece that I've been really involved in for the last 2 years is federal food safety legislation. So after the spinach outbreaks a few years ago, and peanuts and livestock over and over again, and salad this year, and usually there's anywhere from 3 to 10 national level food recalls happening simultaneously. I've been going back and forth to Washington a lot, working on federal food safety legislation, because when it was first written, there was this assumption that every farmer is the same size as Dole, and we should all follow the same standards, and those standards essentially say that anybody who you can grow anything you want on your farms. That's a legal crop anyway. You can grow anything you want on your farms, and you can harvest it, but that's pretty much it. After that, you are a facility, and a facility is a processor, and FDA and the consumer groups want every processor to be treated the same, which means in the House version, a 5-part strategy, a food safety plan, a food defense plan on how you're going to keep terrorists from coming onto your farm and contaminating your food supply, a traceability system, register with FDA and pay a $500 a year annual fee. And I can tell you that I'm not doing 4 of those things on my farm. I'm willing to do a food safety plan at some point. And so I've been going back and forth to Washington, and about 6 months ago, I'm visiting senators' offices. So I'm a lobbyist. At the state level, I'm a registered lobbyist, and at the federal level, I'm doing informational exchanges of information. And at the federal level, I started doing a tally, and I realized there are 210,000 produce farmers in the United States who are all supposed to do all of these things. And I can tell you that 209,000 of them don't have a clue that this is coming. And the word yesterday was that the vote may happen sometime between now and next Friday on the Senate version of the bill. And the good thing is that we've been very effective. There are about 5 of us in the whole country who've been going back and forth to Washington and talking to senators' offices, and the National Sustainable Ag Coalition's been doing the groundwork inside the offices. There are about 5 of us who've essentially been able to change that federal food safety thing. So if the Senate version passes, it's actually much more manageable and workable. Where are the pressure points? The big pressure point is the 2012 Farm Bill, which will set federal farm policy for the next 5 years. I think I've worked now on 5 of those, and this will be my 6th. And I was 5 when I started. And I'm not really seeing that as the place where we make transformational change. We make incremental change in the Farm Bill. We make
And that's
transformational
meaningful.
change on the ground. And so, on the ground is where you drive things, and then it gets turned into policy. You've had your hand up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we might diverge to a little different direction. It's real good to think about international and national and all these big organizations and all the laws that apply. But I teach a seminar, okay? And it's a different model than what most everybody has or thinks about. And it brings it down to the individual level. It's called New Idea Gardening. And what it is really is organic gardening without money. And in the seminar, I take people through and I show them how to get all of the nutrients they need to build their soil, have nutritious food from their existing lifestyle. And then I prove it to them, and then I show them how to get it. And to me, if we can start at the individual level, if we save the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves. So you take, for instance, one of you mentioned all of the stuff coming from California. Well, one of the things that is traveling around this country in these big semis is fertilizer, okay? And if you look at the fertilizer, it's 70% clay. Now, I don't know about your backyard, but I don't need any more clay in my backyard. Yet they're paying good money in transportation to bring us clay. We're lucky here in the state of Maine. And I can document it because I've been doing these experiments for 37 years now, over 37 years. You don't have to fight bugs with chemicals. You don't have to buy fertilizer. Everything we need is here in our lifestyle now. And by here, I don't mean just Maine, because I did this also Missouri, Utah, and Minnesota. It's all in our lifestyle now if we take it at an individual level. And so what I'm wondering is, how it's okay to talk about the national, but how are we going to get the individual in? Molly talked about people are interested in coming to this country to go back to their country to teach sustainability. How can you have sustainability if it's coming from BP or Shell? We're not teaching these people how to get it out of their lifestyle. You go to the poor countries overseas. Who's over there? It's the people, and I don't mean to badmouth the USDA too much, okay? But it's people like that that are pushing for the big companies when we could get it from their lifestyle. You look at, my course runs 1940 or older. I don't go 1940 or newer until I need to prove stuff with modern technology. Because at 1940 roughly, the government started bringing it in for pushing for the big conglomerates, okay? So I guess I'll just end my little spiel with, let's try and bring it down to the individual level, because everything you need to garden organically is in your lifestyle now.
I've heard great things about your seminars, by the way. Some of our students attended a seminar that you had in Bar Harbor and came back really enthusiastic about it. So.
I had some of these students come out to my place that are from other countries
Mhm.
to promote so that they could see, to bring it to their country, you know, and I'm actually hoping to work with you guys to promote this so that we can stop this big energy flux into our food and end up with better food as a result.
Well, that sounds promising.
So I'm sorry, we have to stop here. We really try to make sure we watch the time so that people who have other commitments can go. I think Molly and Russell will be here for a little bit longer to answer questions, but as a token of our appreciation, you get your very own coffee mug for the coffee conversation. And this is the woman who built this house. She was a playwright, or she and her husband, and they used to have Bets here. She was Mrs. Burton Harris, and Sea Urchins 1886, and Deering Common 2008.
Lovely.
And, well, is it cute?
No,
the
the
baby.
baby.
Oh, the baby.
belongs to the child.
Bling, baby Bling. So next week at this time, we're going to have Charles Simic, the Pulitzer Prize winning poet and the poet laureate of the U.S. The week after that, with our very own Candace Dover, poet and lecturer. She will be interviewing Charlie. The week after that, we're going to have the new Alan Stone Chair of the Visual Arts, Catherine Klinger, speak with Suzanne McCullough, who's a trustee and the head curator of fine prints and drawings at the Art Institute of Chicago. So Molly and Russell, thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for coming.